Hey, welcome to another episode of the Not Scrum Done podcast. I'm your co host, Andreanna Marshall, professional Scrum Trainer, and that's my amazing co host.
Grand Scrum Master Scott, everyone. Greetings.
Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to talk about how you can introduce Scrum to your team, how you can teach them. That's something that comes up in our classes. After the class, people want to know, how can I go and teach my organization or my team Scrum? And fortunately, scrum.org has actually created a template for us that we'll walk through. We'll give you some tips, some tricks, and how we would conduct it. And we don't always do it the same way. So you get like a two for one. And in this video, you get a couple different ways on how you can introduce Scrum to your team using one template. We'll go over this template and we will also leave a link in the description so that you can have this template as well. All right, so here is the template and it is using Mural. If you haven't used Mural, there are plenty of tutorials on this. It is super easy to use. Don't worry, you could figure this out in about 5 minutes. Just imagine this is a fantastic whiteboard where people can collaborate together. So, the first thing that I want to go over is this really shouldn't take you much time to prepare. The training itself is about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at best, but really, if you stay within the time box that's recommended on each segment, you should be able to finish this within an hour and a half. Now, it is recommended 2 to 10 people. You can always squeeze in a little more if you really have to, but understand that this is really geared toward the team and understanding what is Scrum, how to use Scrum, if Scrum is right for you, and we'll go over all of that as well. The first thing we recommend before you get started is to just take a look at the template, understand each of the areas, why we're actually doing this. You really want your teams to understand Scrum, and maybe you have a more advanced team, but that's okay. You can help them inspect and adapt. And I will say, if you're teaching the organization or leaders, this is still a great template where you can tweak it just a little bit to make sure it's geared towards them. All right, so the first thing that we're going to go to is, what is professional Scrum? And this section is actually a section that we do in our classes. We go over this with each of our students. Every single professional Scrum Master one class has this. Even the professional Scrum Product Owner one class has the same framework that they go over. This is very common. You can go to the website and see this. So, Scott, do you want to start us off with telling us how you actually facilitate this in your class?
Yes, Andriana. The way I facilitate this is I actually do this and let the students watch me as I'm going through the Scrum Guide, because I make the assumption that even if you've read the Scrum Guide, that you may not understand it. I like to be the captain of the ship to go through it at least one pass.
And to add a little bit, that's basically Scott's just moving these elements and showing where that fits on the framework and describing each element. So what I do is a little bit different. When we do this activity, the students in the class pick which element they would like to take. They study the elements, depending on the size of the class, for about 5 minutes. And then they come back, they place where they believe this, for example, product owner belongs. Does it belong with the four red people, the blue, the green, and then describe what the product owner does. And I call out each element, and that's what we do for about 20, maybe even 30 minutes. And then at the end, I do what Scott does, which is go around and make sure that they have a quick understanding of each of the elements and how they all work together. No matter how you do this activity, you should try to get it done within 15 minutes, especially we have 2 to 10 people should be reading the Scrum Guide. Their source is the Scrum Guide. So if they do come prepared with that, you can probably get through this in 15 minutes with each of the techniques that we described. The second thing we have is the Scrum Values, and this activity is about 15 minutes. I really like that this is a part of this template because a lot of times people forget that the Scrum Values are the lifeline of Scrum, and without them, you're just going through the motions. Scott, you want to run us through a way that you can facilitate teaching this?
Yes, this is awesome. This is to me the most important part of Scrum, as Andriana and I identified before. We did a case study overview in another video saying that oftentimes when teams adopt Scrum, they forget about the values. This is a great exercise for you to really just think about, what do these five things mean? Scrum values on your team. We have courage here. In this example, you could do run an exercise with your team. What does courage mean to you? What does it look like? What does it smell like? How do we know when we have courage? It's a great way to operationalize your values so that we all have the same understanding of what courage means. One reason I like to do that is, for example, courage in the United States may be different than somebody in France, London, Australia, or whatever. And in most cases, I have Scrum team members who are from all over the world, and these words do not mean the same to them. I like this exercise for that reason. Give an example of what courage means on your team. Common answer could be that somebody have something on their mind, they speak up freely. Psychologically safe environment. Great. Let's go to focus. When we think about focus, we all want to be going in the same direction. We have the same goal, supporting the sprint goal and the product goals. With those two artifacts in mind, how do we know if we focusing on the right thing? How do we know if we focusing on Scrum? How do we know if we focusing on the definition of done? What does that look like? What does it smell like? Let's get some examples for your team so that we all have a shared understanding of what focus look like. This is just one sticky note. If you need more, just duplicate this and hopefully you can fill this up so that you have a clear understanding from everybody on your Scrum team of what focus look like. Now let's go to commitment. Commitment in Scrum means that we're going to do our best and help each other. Now expand upon that. What does commitment mean to your Scrum team? Hey, Andronna, what commitment mean to you? Scott, what does commitment mean to you? Whoever else is on your team, you want to ask them that and capture here. Let's go down to respect. We respect each other's skill set, that we're doing the right thing, that we're doing the best that we can. So what does that look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Can we apply the five senses to that? And the same thing with openness. We oftentimes talk about a psychologically safe environment, but if we are open, that also creates a psychologically safe environment that we freely can speak about whatever's on our mind. If we agree or disagree, fine. That also supports courage as well. First of all, do we have the courage to speak up and call things out when we have an opinion? And do we feel freely and open enough to do that in this environment? Andriana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's one really great way to facilitate this. Another thing that you can do with this that is a little bit outside of this is you can use this to create working agreements with your teams. So I've used this. An example is for courage. I've had teams put down, I'll speak up when and ask questions. I won't be a silent participant. Another thing, focus. I had a team when we were in person, they would close laptops any meeting, close laptops to make sure everyone was focused and they all held each other accountable because they all agreed to this. In a hybrid or virtual world, what you can do is make sure everyone has do not disturb, no one has their phones out, you only have that one tab open. You can't necessarily regulate each other, but if you respect each other and the agreements that you made together, then you will take this commitment seriously. That's just a couple examples there. I won't go through all of them, but I think you get the gist. You have one way that you can facilitate it within this, and then you have another way where you can extract this and actually create working agreements with your team. The third segment of this is should we use Scrum? And this is a very interesting part because not every team has to use Scrum. A lot of times teams are mandated to use Scrum and they don't really like that. This really gives, in my opinion, the freedom and flexibility for people to be able to choose the path that they want to go on. I personally think that commitments that people make, they take more seriously than commitments people give them or force them to have. Scott, what do you think about this?
I totally agree with you. Should we use Scrum? Gives us a way to step back as a Scrum team and really ask ourselves, are we using the right tool for the problem that we have? Every tool was fit for some purpose. Scrum was created for complex work, which means there's more unknown than known about what we're trying to do. So if we start out with number one, for example, reasons to use Scrum, it should fit somewhere in that line because Scrum was made for complex work. And some of the things you should be thinking about when you use Scrum, let's go to point number two, reasons not to use Scrum. Scrum is not a silver bullet to deliver faster to customers. That is a huge myth. Scrum does do a great job of highlighting what we can do and what we cannot do. Scrum just raised that impediment for us. Get in the room and talk about it and figure out what we're going to do from there. We're going to run an experiment. We only have a hypothesis, and we're going to do something to either prove or disprove that hypothesis, and then let that be our guide for the next experiment or the next step that we take. That's just a couple examples of how you would use this to get started, just to have that open conversation with your team. Why are we doing Scrum? Is it the right tool for us to be using that's best for what we're trying to accomplish? Andriana.
There are about 8 areas for this. Just go through them with your team. This is really straightforward. You don't need like different ways to really go through this. Just go through each of the questions, get feedback, understand what are some of the reasons to use Scrum, not use Scrum, what about your current process is or is not working, how can Scrum help, and what type of support you'll need. And I think, Scott, you alluded to all those points, which is great. The fourth segment of this is how will we get started? You're ready to start. You've decided there are more reasons for us to use this than not use this. For this section, this is to highlight what you may need to do prior to starting your first sprint. There are logistical things that you have to do. It's just plain and simple. Everything is not a magic wand. And as soon as you start sprinting, everything is easy and life is grand. You do have some work that you need to put in ahead of time. I'll start with something very simple the daily scrum, for example. When, where, who, how will we assess our progress? The Scrum Guide does say it needs to be the same day, the same time, 5 days a week. So logistically, you're going to need to book a conference room and you're going to need to have it at the same time, same day, 5 days a week. But with that being said, where are you going to have this? Make sure who's attending. We already know it's the developers, the people that are working on the actual sprint. But then how are you going to actually assess your progress toward your sprint goal? Are you gonna use a burn down chart? Are you going to use a burn up chart? Are you going to use cumulative flow? You have multiple options that you can pick from, and you'll have to assess that. And obviously, there's a lot more things that you'll have to do, but this is going to help you think through all of that. Scott, do you have anything to add?
The other thing I will add to that is we talked about a new person getting started with Scrum. If I'm starting on a Scrum team that's been doing Scrum already, I have used this page just as a checklist for me to make sure I have asked the right questions because I'm learning the Scrum team that's already up and running, not starting. They already up and running. So I use this as a Scrum Master going into a new environment. Again, just to remind me of some questions that I might want. Hey, what do y'all have y'all meetings at? What do y'all do this? Again, thinking about the logistics part of it, because sometimes I just forget. So this is just a nice little template for me to look at. Oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, yeah, I need to do that. Andriana.
Great. And the last section is how will we check our progress? This is really important even if you have a Scrum team currently and you're working on improving, you're really assessing and doing a health check on how you're actually using Scrum. Now, of course, we have transparency with our artifacts. Every event is going to be a checkpoint for us to inspect and adapt. But this section here, I really like because it's assessing your use of Scrum itself. So you'll go through each of these questions. What do we think is working? What's not working? It's almost like a larger scale retrospective, but it's focused on our use of Scrum as opposed to what happened in the last sprint. What do you think, Scott?
No, I really love this, especially number 4. What could we be ignoring or hiding? Remember, Scrum is a great tool that will raise impediments for us to resolve. Sometimes you can get comfortable. And this is a good exercise to do to ask that question. What are we hiding? What are we ignoring? Are we really having the conversation that we really need to talk about? This is a great tool to level up, and I would also do this again. Maybe let's say 30 days, do a health check. How are we doing it at the processes of Scrum? How are we doing at this? Is there anything else we need to add? But before you ask that question, I will look at my Scrum guide. I will look at my Scrum team and make sure you're doing all of Scrum first. Yes, we do know it's a framework. It's not complete in terms of you may need to add other things to it. The Scrum guide first and make sure you got that doing well before you begin to have those conversations to add other things.
While that was the last section, don't forget to ask for feedback so that you can make this better and that you share things out and that you're constantly keeping track of what's going on so that you can continuously improve just like you would do anything else. All right. So don't forget this link is going to be in the description. We're hoping this really helps you boost the practice of Scrum and also just your ability to teach. As Scrum Masters or Agile Coach, we should be teaching Scrum and helping teams get better. So we're hoping that this can help you on that journey. If you made it to the end of this video, that means you have an attention span greater than a goldfish.
Be legendary, everyone, but not scrummed up.